Greetings, mortals. You think you know what's real. You think television is fiction. But what if I told you some of the strangest episodes of the X-Files were not made up, but reconstructed? Tonight, we open the real files, the ones they never meant for you to find.
Fear is a virus. It spreads through whispers, through screams, through static on a police radio. In 2000, The X-Files aired one of its most experimental episodes, X-Cops, Season 7, Episode 12. Unlike anything the series had done before, it was filmed in the gritty handheld style of Cops. Flashlights slicing through dark alleyways, shaky footage of chaos, law enforcement officers panting between clipped statements. First glance, it seemed like parody. But what it revealed was something more terrifying than satire. Shadowy figures, glowing eyes, a shape that shifted, changing for every witness. And here's the part they didn't mention in the credits. X-Cops was inspired by dozens of real 911 calls and officer reports, spanning over a decade. Reports of figures that vanished, voices that spoke in languages no one recognized. Scenes so disturbing that seasoned cops broke protocol, abandoned posts, and never returned. These weren't scripts, they were statements. Let's rewind to the early 1990s, South Los Angeles. A precinct received 5 separate calls in 1 week from different blocks, all reporting a tall man with no eyes walking rooftops. Officers responded. One veteran reportedly froze and refused to enter the building. His body cam, later reviewed internally, showed nothing, but he kept repeating a single phrase. "It was waiting for me." He left the force a month later. His resignation letter was never made public, but an internal memo, leaked years later, mentioned a recurring hallucinatory phenomenon under investigation. Some called it a psychotic break, others a haunting. Then there's the case of Officer Maria D., who, during a routine call to an abandoned home in 1994, reported seeing children standing in the basement, naked, motionless, eyes covered in black grease. When backup arrived, the home was empty. There were no children in the system matching her descriptions. She described the air as electric, said her radio went dead, her flashlight wouldn't turn on. She could hear whispering, but no source. No one filed an official report. It was handled internally. Sound familiar? The X-Cops episode introduces a creature that manifests based on personal fear. Every officer sees something different. A werewolf, a violent ghost, even a past abuser. It's fear made flesh. Now compare that to the real-life concept of fear contagion. The theory goes, fear is transferable. Emotional states can be spread, not just psychologically, but somatically. Your body mimics what others feel. Heart rate spikes, hands sweat. The group reacts as one. But what happens when the thing you fear reacts back? In 1997, in a run-down Detroit neighborhood, 5 separate officers responded to a call about a body in a stairwell. Each gave different testimony. One saw an old woman with no legs. Another saw a large man with sharp teeth. A third claimed nothing was there. But when reviewing footage from his cruiser, a shadow was visible. Investigators flagged it, called it a trick of the light. The tapes went missing 2 months later. Let's go deeper. There's an unofficial training module circulated in some U.S. police academies during the 90s that covered handling emotionally intense paranormal calls. It's said to include tips on avoiding eye contact with subject anomalies, recognizing shared delusion events, remaining silent when communications systems glitch. Why would they train rookies for this? Unless they've seen it before. Back to X-Cops. The genius of the episode isn't its creature. It's the way the narrative treats fear as infectious. It spreads, it multiplies. And the audience, watching through shaky cameras and tight audio loops, begins to feel it too. This mirrors a cluster case out of New Jersey in 1999. Over 6 nights, dispatchers received 911 calls from 3 towns, all describing a woman standing in intersections, bleeding from her eyes, whispering names. Each time, patrol cars would arrive and find no one. Eventually, one officer parked his car and waited all night at the intersection. At 3:44 a.m., his body cam shut off. He didn't speak for days. When he finally spoke to his captain, he said, "She said my name, my middle name." Coincidence or contact? Experts in mass hysteria suggest shared hallucinations are possible, but rare. Yet from Chicago to Portland, Miami to Seattle, similar reports keep surfacing. Shadow people, creatures in the mist, disembodied laughter in stairwells. Some are brushed off, others quietly buried. But a few cases still whisper through forums, late-night radio, and Reddit confessionals. One post from 2014, allegedly from a retired Baltimore officer, describes an area near Druid Hill Park where GPS cuts out. Radios buzz, no birds. One night, saw a figure under the bridge, 7 feet tall, motionless. Looked like it was wearing skin, but inside out. These aren't movie pitches, they're testimonies. The FBI once operated a quiet sub-program called Project Refrain, believed to be a behavioral response team for unexplained cases. The program dissolved in the early 2000s. No documentation remains. But those involved said it wasn't about ghosts. It was about fear. Measuring it, mapping it, and, allegedly, capturing it. A conspiracy? Maybe. But one thread connects it all. The badge. The people trained to run toward the threat, finding themselves running away. Let's not forget one more crucial detail. X-Cops was greenlit after the showrunners received hundreds of letters from real officers describing unexplainable events on duty. They wanted to tell those stories. The twisted, fractured midnight stories that never made it to press. Because no one would believe them. Or worse, someone would. Figure with no shadow. Time skipped. Repeating voices from drains. Door opened from inside. House was locked. Maybe it's just stress, trauma, adrenaline, afraid mind's defense. Or maybe fear is a living thing. A parasite, feeding on panic, shaping itself like smoke until it finds the right moment and moves in. So here's the question. When law enforcement, designed to protect us from reality, starts running from something unreal, what's left to keep us safe? And who do we call when 911 doesn't answer? Some homes aren't built for living. They're built for hiding. From the world, from truth, from judgment. There are episodes of The X-Files that terrify you with monsters, others with ideas. But one episode, Season 4, Episode 2, titled simply Home, did both. And it did it so effectively, so grotesquely, that Fox banned it from television after its first airing. Why? Because the horror wasn't science fiction. It was history. It was reality. It was a mirror. The episode tells the story of the Peacock family, inbred, violent, isolated. They live in a crumbling farmhouse far from any city where they've hidden their existence for decades, and their disfigured matriarch is kept under a bed, carted out only when they want to reproduce. It's one of the most disturbing plots ever put on primetime television. But what most don't know? Home wasn't just a creation of the writer's minds. It was inspired by real whispers, stories buried in police records and rural rumor about a family in Pennsylvania. The Ward family. Not much exists officially, but what we do know is this. In 1997, a team of social workers and local law enforcement entered a secluded property outside Fayette County, Pennsylvania. What they found became a case study in state failure and a blueprint for horror fiction. The property had no plumbing, no electricity. The children, at least 4, had never attended school. None had birth certificates. None had been vaccinated. Some couldn't speak in full sentences. They were physically deformed, possibly from generations of inbreeding, and suffered from numerous untreated medical conditions. And then there was the matriarch. According to unofficial reports, officers found her under a metal frame bed concealed beneath layers of blankets and newspaper. Locals called it the dirt room. She was missing both legs, partially blind, and reportedly referred to one of her sons as her husband. No charges were filed. Why? The family had technically broken no laws. There was no official record of abuse. No one had ever seen anything, because no one ever came close. Neighbors, miles away, only spoke of hearing screams at night or the occasional sighting of a figure. When pressed, they said they thought the family were just reclusive, poor, backward. But what lived in that house was something else, nearly scene for scene. In Home, the agents discover the Peacock family after a baby is found buried alive. The family's secrets unravel like a nightmare. Traps hidden under floorboards, razor blades tucked into baseball bats, and beneath it all, a culture of violent survivalism and bloodline preservation at any cost. The resemblance to the Wards is chilling. Even the setting matches. Pennsylvania farmland, isolation, decay, a house where time stopped and something else took over. The real horror wasn't just what happened inside that house. It was how long it remained hidden. You see, systems break down in the margins. In places far from city lights and internet service, where the dirt roads turn to mud and the neighbors mind their own business. In those places, reality becomes elastic. Rules bend. And monsters, real monsters, go unnoticed. One social worker from that original visit later confessed to a journalist, off the record, "It felt like stepping into a different century. They looked at us like we were the intruders." She never worked a rural case again. There's a psychology to this, a term called transgenerational trauma fusion. It happens when families develop entirely internal systems of logic and behavior, isolated from society for so long that they create their own morality. In that world, survival replaces ethics. Reproduction becomes ritual. Pain becomes tradition. In Home, we see the outcome. A family so removed from humanity that they've forgotten it entirely. And in real life, the Wards, they were never reintegrated. After media interest died, they vanished, moved, split, or maybe they didn't. Maybe they're still out there. Maybe there are more. It's not just Pennsylvania. In Appalachia, stories of isolated family groups echo through local legend. Generations that never left their land. Children raised in shadows. Whole bloodlines undocumented. The U.S. Census regularly fails to account for households in these areas. Many aren't mapped. Some aren't even reachable during the winter. And yet, people live there. Or something does. Home remains the only episode of The X-Files that was banned by Fox. Not for violence, not for language, but because it made people confront a truth they'd rather forget. That some horrors aren't born in laboratories or summoned by rituals. Some horrors are born in silence, in neglect, in places where no one's looking. And those horrors, they grow. Let's go deeper. The Wards weren't a known case until after the episode aired, but urban legends about similar families existed long before, told in whispers by hunters, hikers, and long-haul truckers. Tales of abandoned houses with windows boarded from the inside, of skeletal figures glimpsed in tree lines, of voices that spoke in strange, garbled versions of English. Anthropologists call these folkloric echoes. Sociologists call them signs of forgotten communities. But horror writers? They call it inspiration. What makes Home so enduring isn't just the shock, it's the accuracy. The writers didn't need to stretch fiction far, because truth had already paved the way. Even the dialogue in the episode mirrors reported speech from Appalachian caseworkers. Monosyllabic answers, repetitive phrasing, ritualistic language. One line stands out from the episode's matriarch. "You think you're better than us?" A line repeated, almost identically, in transcripts from the ward's psychiatric interviews. Let's pause on that, because that line, that accusation, reveals everything. The divide between the watchers and the watched, between those who call others monsters and those who've lived their whole lives hiding from them. Who are we to say what's normal? Where do we draw the line between survival and evil? Some say the wards were victims of poverty, of neglect, of an uncaring system. Others call them predators, willingly continuing cycles of incest and abuse. But the truth, as always, is buried in the dirt. In a house long since condemned. In a room beneath a bed. In a scream that no one heard. Until television amplified it. The scariest part of Home isn't the violence. It's the implication that we looked away, that we let it happen, and that somewhere, right now, another family is being forgotten, hidden, buried in bureaucracy, waiting for someone to knock. And if no one does, then the dirt stays undisturbed, quote unquote, and the stories keep repeating. Some voices call from beyond the grave. Others never left the field where they died. 1996, the episode was called The Field Where I Died. At the time, it was fiction. 6 months later, it wasn't. On March 26, 1997, police entered a mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California. Inside, they found 39 bodies, each dressed identically in black clothing and Nike sneakers, covered by purple shrouds, bunk beds lined in eerie precision. They had died by suicide. Their faces were calm. They were members of a group called Heaven's Gate. And their leader? He claimed they were going to the stars. The parallels between the episode and the cult were unnerving. Too close, too specific. But let's rewind. The Field Where I Died focuses on a cult named the Temple of the Seven Stars, led by a man named Ephesian. He preaches about reincarnation, cosmic purpose, and apocalyptic salvation. His followers believe they've lived many lives together and that their final act, their ritual suicide, will reunite them in eternity. They speak in unison, they quote scriptures that don't exist, they live on the edge of society, just like Heaven's Gate. Marshall Applewhite, Heaven's Gate's real-world leader, told his followers they were vessels for an evolutionary leap, that Earth was a corrupted realm, that the Hale-Bopp comet, which passed Earth in 1997, carried a spacecraft, their exit ramp. He spoke in strange cadences, eyes wide and unblinking. "You must leave your human body behind," he said. "Your vehicle. This is not death. This is graduation." The episode aired months before that message was ever made public, and yet it matches almost word for word. Coincidence? Or something darker? Cults have a gravitational pull, not just on the vulnerable, but on the curious, on those who see patterns others miss, who long for order in chaos. That's why the X-Files was so potent a vessel, because it didn't mock belief, it questioned it, studied it, dismantled it. And in the field where I died, that questioning becomes dangerous. Agent Mulder experiences something he can't explain, a psychic link, a spiritual memory. He starts to believe he's lived before, that he and the cult member Melissa share a cosmic bond across lifetimes. And in doing so, he becomes compromised. That's the core of cult ideology, emotional compromise. You don't join a cult overnight, you slide into it. Little by little, story by story, until reality shifts, until your pain finds purpose, until death feels like destiny. Heaven's Gate didn't call itself a cult. It called itself a classroom. Their website is still live, a fossil of digital delusion. Fonts from the 90s, statements about transcendence, lists of rules and exit conditions, and buried within it, the final words of people who truly believed they were going home. I'm looking forward to this. It's the most exciting thing I've ever done. Those weren't characters. Those were real people. People who held hands, smiled for cameras, and walked willingly into the unknown. The field where I died doesn't end with closure. Melissa dies in the compound. Mulder weeps, unsure if his memories were real or imagined. The episode leaves us with a question. What if the soul does carry memories? What if trauma echoes across time? Modern cult psychology acknowledges the power of shared trauma. That's what binds these groups. Heaven's Gate wasn't the only one. Waco, Jonestown, Nexium, the Order of the Solar Temple. Each began with vision and ended in fire or silence. And many shared key elements. Charismatic leadership, a messiah figure who speaks in absolutes. Isolation, compounds, communes, secrecy. Apocalyptic prophecy, a sense of impending cosmic change. Identity replacement, new names, new roles, new truths. In Heaven's Gate, members surrendered everything. Money, family, their own names. They gave up sex, food, eventually life. One member, Sawyer, left the group years before the final act. In interviews, he describes waking up in the middle of the night, unable to breathe. I still felt them, he said, like they were calling me. Psychologists call it cognitive fusion, when belief becomes indistinguishable from identity, and the X-Files knew it. In the field where I died, a fusion is captured. His followers are broken, but even under interrogation, they don't recant. They don't cry, they wait. Because they think this life isn't the end. Neither did the real followers. When autopsies were performed on Heaven's Gate members, something eerie emerged. Many had consumed phenobarbital, vodka. Some had plastic bags over their heads. But they died peacefully, no struggle, no marks. As if they were going to sleep. The final video recordings, still viewable online, show Applewhite in his final days. He smiles, he reassures. He tells them that what they're doing is brave, necessary. He looks straight into the camera and believes it. What scared audiences about the field where I died wasn't the supernatural. It was the possible, the probable, that someone, somewhere, might be planning the same thing. And they were. This raises the most disturbing idea. Did the X-Files predict it, or did it inspire it? There's no proof that Applewhite saw the episode. No link between Heaven's Gate and the show. But the themes, the language, the aesthetic of the episode feel less like commentary and more like premonition. The purple robes, the ritualistic groupings, the idea of becoming more through death. And the field, that empty field where they all died. The X-Files always asked if we're alone, but here it asks something more haunting. What happens when we want to be? When we choose to leave the world behind? Cults don't just promise truth, they promise escape. A way out of loneliness, of pain, of questions. But they never offer return. In the end, Heaven's Gate became a warning, but also a mystery, because 39 people with full agency chose death, and their leader's words still echo. We are not human. We are souls using bodies as containers.
That's what the X-Files tapped into.
That beneath every conspiracy, every shadowy figure and secret file, there are people searching, hoping, breaking, and sometimes dying.
They say truth is stranger than fiction. But what happens when fiction is truth? We've seen the shadows between TV screens and crime scene tape. Stories that crawled from backwoods bedrooms, whispered through static-choked radios, and followed cults to their final breath. These weren't scripts, they were signals, warnings. Good evening, and good night, mortals. Until next time.